Good morning or good afternoon if you're on the East Coast. Welcome to the March 17th, 2020 edition of Broadband Breakfast Live Online. We are live, we hope. We are, I think all of us working from home today or in shelter at shelter-in-place locations. And we are here to talk about broadband and the coronavirus. And specifically today, we're going to talk about the Keep America Connected pledge. My name is Drew Clark. I'm editor and publisher of Broadband Breakfast. We launched this live online series last Friday with an event focusing on education, online education, and what experts, both in the field of online education and in the field of kind of the pipes, the structure, what they were doing to adapt to the real crisis that we're now facing. And obviously all around us, we're in a different world than we were a week ago or 3 days ago, 4 days ago. So I'm really grateful for our three guests, in addition to myself, who have agreed to participate. We have two of them in the green room here, and I'll put them live just in a moment. Thank you for your comments. Those let us know that you are here. And please do send comments, questions, and other items that you'd like addressed. We're gonna end promptly at 1 o'clock Eastern time. And before I introduce my panelists, I do want to say another word. Part of this is there's so much new that where do we start? Where do we start in examining and understanding this? I am now in Utah in the Mountain Time zone, and I'm with my household, and we are not seeing anyone. We are here. That's it. And as the kind of the severity of this has really come across to the public, we're really realizing that we need to change our behavior. But one of the most important things that we need to change is to use broadband, right? And so that's what the purpose of this webcast series, which we'll do every Monday through Friday at noon, is to share how broadband can be a solution to the problems raised by the coronavirus. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our three guests. We have with us here Claude Aiken, who is the CEO of the Wireless Internet Service Providers Association. Thank you for being with us, Claude. We have Mike Romano, the Senior Vice President of NTCA, the Rural Broadband Association, and Angie Cronenberg, who is the General Counsel and I believe the Chief Legal Officer for Encompass. Each of you are signatories to the Keep America Connected pledge. And we're going to start off talking about that. What is that? Why did your organization sign up for it? And what does it mean effectively? And then we'll kind of have an interactive discussion, and we'll invite commenters from our different live streams on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube to offer comments. So let's go ahead and start. Turn the time over to you, Claude. Say a brief word about yourself, your organization, and the Keep America Connected pledge. Okay, sorry, I need to unmute you.
Exciting. Oh, there we go.
Go ahead, Claude.
We're just figuring this out as we go. So my name is Claude Aiken. I'm the president and CEO of the Wireless Internet Service Providers Association. Sorry, I'm getting a lot of feedback here. Need to.
Part of the challenge. Take your time.
Part of the challenge. Okay. As I was saying, I'm the president and CEO of the Wireless Internet Service Providers Association. We're an organization that represents thousands of small, rural, community-based broadband providers all across the nation. we are excited to be supportive of FCC Chairman Pai's Keeping America Connected pledge, and are very excited to see a lot of our members also hopping on and committing to effectively not turn off or charge late fees for customers who are having a tough time during this coronavirus pandemic. So excited to be here and excited to be supporting and looking forward to the conversation.
Okay, great. We'll talk more about some of the experiences your organization's having on the ground, but let's just get a little more logistics and specifics on the Keep America Connected pledge. What led to it? I assume obviously the chairman of the FCC, Ajit Pai, reached out to you and others, but just kind of talk through the last couple of days in which this came to pass, Claude, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, I think it's
Claude, I think you've muted yourself, so we can't hear you right now. Good. All right, there we go. Go ahead.
All right, I'm trying to deal with all of the feedback that I'm getting. So I think the fact that I'm even here right now is indicative of how much things have changed in the past few days. Earlier this morning, we would have kicked off our spring conference in Dallas. So, the fact that I'm here chatting with you all from my home in Alexandria, Virginia is just a testament to how quickly this country has changed over the course of the past week, which I think is probably part of the impetus behind the pledge in the first place, and the need for all of the providers represented by the folks on this cast to really step up. As folks are increasingly self-quarantining if they have the virus, or socially distancing and working from home, staying at home. Internet connectivity becomes even more important. You talked in the opening about the need for students to remain online, and Commissioner Rosenworcel at the FCC has been a huge leader on the issue that she calls the homework gap. And we're really seeing that now on the ground, impacting students who are out of school and trying to engage in their classwork from home. And I think the fact that you see all of us here working and participating in this cast from home as well is just goes to show how important internet connectivity is in this time of national crisis.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Claude. And we'll talk more about some of the specifics that you're encountering, your members are encountering, and really even just sort of the on the ground situations. Let's turn now to Mike Romano. Mike, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about the way NCTA members are interacting and thinking about the Keep America Connected pledge. Why is that important to you, and what does it mean specifically for your organization and its members?
Sure. Thanks, Drew. I'm hoping you can hear me okay.
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Terrific. Yeah, I had to go to, like the others here, we're sort of all scrambling. I had to go to a plan B at the last minute with a different device to make this work. But thank you for having me. So NTCA represents about 850 small rural providers around the United States, serving roughly just under 5% of the U.S. population, but about 35% of the U.S. landmass. The average density is about 7 people per square mile. So from our members' perspective, I think signing on to something like the pledge made a ton of sense. At the end of the day, they're headquartered in the communities they serve. Customer service for them is something where they hear about it in the context of the supermarket or the church parking lot or the schoolyard when people are out. And so this was something I think they were interested in pursuing and living up to. We're pleased to see that right now, I think out of the 185 or so companies that had signed on to the pledge as they initially announced it. I think 110 of those or so, 109 are NTCA members. And I think that just makes a lot of sense given their historic community commitment and the fact that they are based in those the communities they serve. Looking forward to more of the discussion today about some of the challenges they face and what they're doing to try to keep America connected. But we were very encouraged that Chairman Pai had reached out about this. We've seen all of the commissioners of the FCC weigh in this, and a number of folks throughout all of government weighing in about the importance of trying to help people stay connected. So looking forward to the rest of the conversation this morning.
So Mike, this is not necessarily unique to NTCA. We'll talk about other rural aspects in this conversation, but are you running into any sense that rural America is somehow less affected by this, or are there people who are not necessarily as aware as maybe some of the kind of the hot spots in Washington State and New York and California that are maybe at the center for now, although it's clearly growing everywhere? Just talk a little bit about the way that rural members are reacting in your experience to the impact of the coronavirus.
So, I think you're right in the sense that, and this goes globally. I think the United States looked at this initially perhaps a bit more differently before it landed, sort of on the shores here and then started to take root and then has spread now through community transmission, apparently. I think likewise, people certainly feel it when it hits closer to home. They know somebody or know somebody who knows somebody who has been potentially exposed. And so that awareness has grown over time. But I think the good thing is that being in a sort of critical infrastructure industry, in many respects, they're as prepared as anyone can be for something like this. There are issues that I think we'll still all need to work through in terms of some operational questions, some access to equipment and the like. But at the end of the day, the fortunate thing is they've been investing in networks for years. A lot of people in these rural areas have access to as robust, if not more robust networks than people have in even urban areas in terms of high-speed fiber-based connectivity. And so I think that is going to be helpful in getting those communities through this. But yeah, there are still challenges, I think, to work through for sure. And people are still getting their arms around how to respond to those challenges, sort of the process operational changes as well.
Great. No, what wonderful. Thanks for that introduction. We'll certainly come back to this here in a moment as we talk more specifics. And for our viewers, you may sometimes see musical boxes here. On my screen, at least, Claude was in one box, and now he's in another because he's rejoined us. Please forgive the technical difficulties. I know America is going through this right now. We're all experiencing this. It was much harder to do my work yesterday than it was on Friday because we are relying on networks that are perhaps differently engineered. That's something we'll be talking about in one of these Broadband Breakfast live online events in the future. Today, though, we're talking about the Keep America Connected pledge, and I appreciate again everyone being on this discussion. I'm going to turn now to Angie Cronenberg. Please tell us a little bit. Maybe some of our viewers may not be as familiar with Encompass, so talk a little bit about who your members are and how you came to sign this pledge and what it means to your organization and your members. So, Angie, please.
Thank you, Drew. I'm Angie Cronenberg. I'm the Chief Advocate and General Counsel at Encompass. Encompass is the Internet and Competitive Networks Association. We represent small fiber and fixed wireless and some satellite providers who are providing communication services directly to residential and business customers. We also represent companies that are using those networks to also deliver competitive communication services, as well as streaming and video services. So we have a number of different business models that are in our membership, and we're really happy to join you today to talk to you about why it is. We had over 20 member companies who immediately signed up for the Chairman Pai's pledge to keep Americans connected. Because so many of our members are serving critical customers throughout the nation in many different types of geographies in urban, rural, and suburban America, they immediately recognized the need to ensure their customers that they were going to keep the networks up and running, that they were not going to charge them fees if they need to take more time to pay their bills during this pandemic, and also that they were going to keep them connected if they can't pay their bills at all. I think that that is really critical. A number of our member companies also have Wi-Fi hotspots, so they wanted to be sure that everyone understood that, yes, they would make those publicly available to anyone who needs to access them. So from the perspective of Encompass, as well as our members, when we got the call from the chairman last week, we were more than happy to say, yes, we will sign up for this, and we will do everything we can, do our part to make sure that Americans are going to stay connected, and that all of the critical customers who are also serving, whether it's the schools, the hospitals, the libraries that need to do more to keep communities connected, that we're going to do what we can to ensure they have the bandwidth that they need, as well as the equipment that they need. So I'm happy to get into that a little bit more as we talk a little bit further about your questions, Drew.
Excellent, excellent. I want to stay on Angie for a moment, but let me, again, for our readers to make sure they understand, this is not too long. So I'm just going to read this Keep Americans Connected pledge. And it says, given the coronavirus pandemic and its impact on American society, company name pledges for the next 60 days to: 1, not terminate service to any resident or small business customer because of their inability to pay their bills due to disruptions caused by the coronavirus pandemic. 2, waive any late fees that any residential or small business customers incur because their economic circumstances related to the coronavirus pandemic. And 3, open its Wi-Fi hotspots to any American who needs them. So, we reported on this on broadbandbreakfast.com yesterday. Tell us, Angie, about this last point about Wi-Fi hotspots, and I'm going to ask the same of the others too. But talk a bit more about what does that mean in terms of, are you there's still security, right? I mean, to just walk through the process for a Wi-Fi hotspot and how it works.
Sure. You may be familiar as a consumer, use your devices when you're out in public, whether it's at the local coffee shop or potentially at a small business that you're visiting. I like to think about my hairdressers. I'm usually there for about an hour and a half to 2 hours every 8 weeks to get my hair done. I want to get on the local Wi-Fi hotspot. One of the options at my hairdressers is Comcast hotspot. I happen to be a Comcast customer, so with my customer identification, I can access that hotspot and get my full internet access, all my services, which is great. For that hour and a half to 2 hours I'm at the hairdressers, I can respond to emails, I can potentially do some work and send some work out while I'm there. So, but it's a closed system. I have to be a customer of Comcast to actually access it. And what our member companies are saying, and some of the very large ISPs like Comcast and AT&T have said, is that you no longer have to identify that you're a customer of ours. We're going to make those Wi-Fi hotspots available to everyone so that you're not having to put in credentials and show that you're a customer in order to access that hotspot. What's so great about it right now, right, is that if you happen to live in an area and let's say you don't have broadband internet access at home, you can now potentially look for public Wi-Fi hotspots that may be near you that you could then join to then get your access so that you can do what we're doing right now, which is talk to people via video conferencing, continue to get your work done to the extent that you have the kind of job that you can work from home.
Excellent. Let's actually continue on the Wi-Fi hotspots and hear from Claude and Mike. Is that an issue for your members? And what are you discovering at this stage? Changes in terms of users' behavior online.
Sure. So I've been hearing from a number of our members who are actually at this very moment working particularly with school districts to set up additional new Wi-Fi hotspots to support remote learning capabilities. There have been a lot of new open hotspots deployed in small towns and rural areas over the course of the past several days, and we're seeing demand for those, and also for new customer service jumping significantly as a result of these societal changes that are happening as a result of the coronavirus.
Okay, and Mike, do you want to address the hotspots question and maybe some of the things your users are experiencing?
Sure. Yeah. So with respect to hotspots, those members that have them out there have taken the pledge to open them and are in the process of doing so, as well as Claude and Angie have both talked about. Likewise, I think working in many respects with community leaders to figure out where those are going to be most effective. Obviously, in a rural area, it's a little harder because once you get outside of a town or something like that, you're getting into suddenly where there are residences. There's not a lot of sort of public places in which to gather outside of some of the residential premises. But nonetheless, where those hotspots do exist or where they can be put into place, folks are looking at about how to do that and working very closely, I think, with community leadership on the best thoughts there, including the educational community. Another thing that I think our members are working on that's been very interesting, we've seen a few members already announce this. It sort of goes in addition to the pledge, talking about how to make sure to address the sort of homework gap, the idea now that people are going to be distance learning, working from home, learning from home. And so offering packages to try to get those houses that are connected but are not necessarily subscribing yet. Again, this is probably is as big an area in some, or big an issue in some areas as anything. Helping them get online, giving them a discounted or free access for a period of time in order to allow those students to participate in classwork to the extent they can while they're compelled to stay at home.
Great. We've got a question.
Oh, I was just going to say, to that end, we've also seen our member companies doing a very similar thing. We have some that work directly with schools and with libraries, and they're putting new equipment into the field to help with the availability. In addition, we have a number of member companies that serve public housing, affordable public housing, low income housing, and they're making the service available for free right now so that hopefully students who are at home, workers who are at home can be connected and can continue to accomplish. I know none of us is accomplishing everything we normally do, right? But that we can continue to accomplish some of the things that we need to do.
We've got a question here that I want to display on the screen here. This is from Roger Timmerman, CEO of Utopia Fiber. He writes, I am partially supportive of the pledge, but didn't sign because it didn't go nearly far enough. Lifeline service should be 100 megabits per second symmetrical. And then here's what I want you to address the question. Bandwidth caps overages need to be removed. Do you all agree that bandwidth caps should be removed for the interim?
I'll tell you from my members' perspective, so they typically are competitive providers, and I'm not aware of any of my members who engage in data caps and then charging overages. So, and in fact, when my member companies show up in a neighborhood, they're typically delivering fiber or a fixed wireless fiber solution and are offering significant amounts of bandwidth, usually much greater than what the incumbent may be offering in that area. So that's not been an issue for us. And then specifically to the question about doing more than what the pledge, so the chairman actually encouraged companies to do more than what the 3 items were on his pledge. And he did address the data caps and the overages that some of the really large companies engage in. And I believe some of them have made additional pledges. And I would encourage, any company that's looking at this Keep Americans Connected pledge to look at it as a kind of a baseline. And if your company can do more, you should be doing more, right? This is a pandemic that should be bringing all of us in the nation as communities together, and each of us sacrificing what we need to sacrifice to come together and doing what we can to help our neighbors. And I'm really proud of my small companies that I represent who are stepping up to do more. And in circumstances that aren't really easy right now, like I was just on the phone with one of my member companies who serves rural Maine, and a third of his technical staff, he has a very small technical staff, and a third of his technical staff are now being isolated because they may have been exposed to the virus when they did some check of work in the community that they needed to see to. So it's really critical that each of us do our part, one, to follow the CDC's guidelines, but then also to really step up and do more than we normally would do in these circumstances.
No, thank you for those words. And we certainly want to come back to, again, what it's like on the ground, how the coronavirus has impacted your operations. But let's just address the bandwidth cap issue from Mike and then Claude before we go into some other topics.
Yeah, thanks, Drew. Much like Angie, our members don't generally, I'm not even aware of any actively at this point, applying data caps to their service. Given the level of investment they've done in their network, generally speaking, again, 60% of the customers are fiber to the prem. So there's not a need for a data cap or overage usage issue or application of a policy like that to those sorts of networks. So I don't think that was in any way that would have been in any way a significant concern with respect to our membership. Again, I can't speak to others. I know that some networks you got to make sure you're balancing capacity and load, but generally speaking, I'm not hearing of any concern about that with respect to our members in these rural areas.
Claude?
Yeah, and I would just echo what Angie and Mike have said. Our members, generally don't have data caps or overage charges anyway, so it's not really an issue for them in terms of being able to sign on to the pledge. I think the only thing that I am hearing from some is that these are really tiny companies operating in very rural areas and receiving zero government subsidies. So the smaller your subscriber count and the lack of any additional sources of revenue makes them have to think really hard about if you have less than 100 customers, and there may be some who can't pay. You really have to count the cost. So I'm really proud of our members who have stepped up to count that cost and to take the pledge.
I mean, what's so unique about this panel, Drew, is that the three associations you asked to join you today, we all represent pretty small companies that are providing service to their communities. And they have much smaller staffs than the really large incumbent ISPs, right? And so the steps that they're taking right now to, one, make sure their employees stay healthy and that they're following the CDC guidelines, that they're not getting exposed to the virus and they're not unwittingly exposing their customers is incredibly important. What I've heard from our member companies is that they're asking their employees to telework if their job permits them to telework. So in other words, if they can do their job from home, they're expected to do their job from home. Of course, there are employees that actually run the networks, right? And so they need to be in the office or in the field doing that work. And they're having to take measures to make sure that the social distancing happens so they're not exposed. So those steps are key because all of this network infrastructure, even of the small companies, is very, very important right now.
No, that's an excellent lead into what the two areas I want to talk next to our panel. But before I do want to make sure the record is clear. We did invite some others. Again, it was very, very last minute because everything's last minute nowadays, right? This is an evolving situation. Every hour, every 24 hours brings new realities. So, and again, part of the reason that we decided to do this every weekday during the month of March is so that we can come back to other voices and other issues as things change and as we have an opportunity to gather online at least to talk about how we're dealing with this pandemic. So the two areas I'd like us to talk about now are, first, let's call it the virtual or the logical infrastructure, right? What is happening on your members' networks, right? How are traffic patterns changing? Have you been able to observe that? And I know you may not be the technical people in the field, so if you don't have an answer, that's understandable. But just any insights you have on that question. And secondly, let's just call it the atom infrastructure, right? When you got to go out into the world, right? Angie just referred to this. What kinds of steps are you hearing from your members that they're taking as precautions? Obviously, if there's something, cut somewhere, you have to go out and address it. And so this talks some of the mechanics, like what is life that's changed for your company's, infrastructure operation.
Yeah, I think. Oh, there's Drew.
We lost our fearless host.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, we're all experiencing some of these issues.
See, there we go.
Yeah, and it happens. So Mike, tell us a little bit about the logical and the physical infrastructure.
Yeah, from the logical perspective, still seeing what sort of shifts in traffic patterns that we are experiencing. But from talking to people about what they might expect, I think the big change I think they were sensing might be coming is essentially it's the peak is going to be spread out throughout the day now. I mean, they always architect networks for peak utilization. And as folks always talk about, oftentimes peak utilization is between, and the FCC tests for performance testing purposes through its own support programs from 6 p.m. to midnight. And in theory, that's when most people are on networks in a dispersed amount of places, placing most significant amounts of demand on the network as they're streaming video or other things. I think now what folks were expecting to see, and I haven't reconnected with them yet, I'm frankly trying not to bother them unless they've got needs from us, for us, but I think what they're expecting to see is that to be dispersed throughout the day. So now people are streaming at home during the day, watching things like this, or interacting with coworkers, or there's maybe some synchronous learning that's underway for educational purposes. And in that event, essentially what we're seeing is not so much a different higher levels of spikes, but more that the peak is being stretched out, if you will, and dispersed across the network to places where it might not have been during the workday or the school day now. So I think from a logical or network sort of data demand perspective, that's probably the biggest thing. I have heard some thoughts about, well, people are going to look at their, if you will, middle mile or transit capacity to make sure likewise that they're able to handle that peak throughout the day. But those are probably the biggest things. But I think at the end of the day, the good thing is a lot of people architect their network for peak period utilization busy hour anyway, and so then operate according to that through that.
No, appreciate it. Let's stick with the logical piece of it, and then we'll go to the physical. Claude, any thoughts on this question?
Sure. Yeah, I think just echo a lot of what Mike has said. A lot of what we're hearing from our members is the stretching of the peak period to encompass more hours in the day, and then also increases in average bandwidth or data utilization up, somewhere between 30 and 60% on a per household basis. Like Mike said, our members architect their networks for peak capacity, so they're doing a lot of additional installs now to new folks who are asking for service. As Angie was mentioning earlier, some of those folks who are interested in getting service for education and for other reasons. But it's an increase in overall amount of gigabytes consumed and traffic during the day that looks more like peak usage for the most part.
Mm-hmm. So up those, it's good to get some numbers like that, even if it is very preliminary. 30 to 60% more consumption. Is that what you said, Claude?
Yeah.
And any differences? I mean, regionally, again, this is very early, I know, but are there any other observations you've heard about kind of dispersion of bandwidth use?
I think it's still a little bit too early to tell. Most of the things that I've heard so far from our members are purely anecdotal to that particular member. You would expect the areas that are under more heavy quarantine than not to have more bandwidth utilized, but I think it's still a little bit too early to tell. But from what I'm hearing from our folks, they've, like Mike was saying, they've architected their networks for peak capacity, so they're not seeing any last mile issues so far.
All right, let's turn to Angie, and I know you'll have a lot to say about this, and please tell us what you're hearing and what you're experiencing out there.
So I'll focus on what I've heard about the business community, since I don't want to repeat things that Claude and Mike have already acknowledged. I would just echo those. I've heard from members that the business community is needing more bandwidth, so and more ports available to them. So they're having to ensure that the business community has what it's need as more of the workers are working from home. It has not been a problem so far, and none of the networks that we represent have reported any disruptions, and that they've been able to meet the new demand of current customers. So that has not been an issue. But I think that what we're seeing in terms of the transit that I believe Mike mentioned is, yes, transit numbers are going up. So we're just seeing a lot more of the constant demand for the bandwidth and the delivery of services right now than ever before, as we see more people teleworking, more students that are engaging in distance learning.
We'll certainly want to talk in more detail about some of these topics at other live online events. But could you just speak to what it's like when you have people who work in an office and are used to kind of office grade connectivity, having to do, let's just say, virtual applications, right? Applications with virtual desktops. Am I the only one having a problem with that, Angie, or is that a more common experience where things that work fine on office grade networks are not necessarily working fine on residential grade networks?
Well, so I can speak to my own experience and my staff's experience. So Encompass closed our office officially on Thursday evening as we were beginning to hear reports. And honestly, as we were hearing from our member companies about what they were doing, and that is to allow their workers to telecommute where they could accomplish their jobs from home. So far, we have not experienced problems with connectivity so that we can accomplish what it is that we're doing. And we engage in a number of conference calls, video conference calls, as well as, of course, working with regulatory documents, filings that need to go in at the FCC, and that kind of communication back and forth with our members. I will say what is challenging right now for the members is that they really just want to be focused on the business, but yet we still have things happening in Washington despite that aren't related to coronavirus, right? Upcoming deadlines, and the deadlines haven't been shifted. So we still have, important deadlines that are coming up, at the end of this week, into next week, and the week following. And we're really hoping that we're going to be able to manage obtaining the information that we need from our members in order to be responsive to what it is that the FCC is asking us to be responsive to. But it's that piece of it's a little challenging for us right now. So I'm hoping that, as we're communicating with the policymakers, that there's an understanding that we're all doing the best we can do right now. And I may be making some additional filings when I've got access to more of my members and can, attain even the additional information that I need to be responsive to the FCC's requests.
Well, and Broadband Breakfast has reported, as others have, that there's just, the FCC is basically on a telework basis right now.
Yeah.
And as we're all discovering, there are some offices that rely on physical things, right? And we will get to that in our next topic area of the kind of the physical networks. But I want to get Mike and Claude's take on this question of let's just call it applications that maybe are used to operating with very high upload speeds. Are you running into problems there? Are there ways to tweak the networks that may be designed more asymmetrically to a more symmetrical direction? Or is that not necessarily a right approach to it, Mike and Claude?
Yeah, so Drew, thanks. I am not hearing of concerns from our members thus far. Generally speaking, they do have symmetrical capabilities in their networks. Obviously, it depends what an individual customer subscribes to, but over time, our members have increasingly pushed out symmetrical services. And so in those areas where they have them available, certainly it's not an issue, and they've expanded that into many rural areas over time. So I'm not hearing of any concerns about that right now, but we have always, in advocacy in DC and what have you, have placed a great emphasis upon symmetrical speed, symmetrical services for this sort of a reason. I think we had been citing distance learning and telemedicine. We just worked with the VA to set up what were called virtual living rooms in the last several months in a few places. And we have a pilot project that I'm hoping will continue, although it might be delayed now, called Valor, which is essentially a virtual living room setting up in American Legion halls or in libraries around the country for veterans to access VA care facilities without having to travel to them. So that's been something that's been part of sort of the DNA of our membership for some time. So I'm not hearing that issue, but there are areas where that's still lacking, even in areas where our members haven't been able to push out necessarily networks capable of symmetrical speeds. So that may pop up over time. I think, Drew, it's just, again, one of these cases, it's too early to say yet how great a strain that's placing on these networks.
Okay, Claude, what are your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, so since many of our members provide service over fixed wireless connectivity, we do have some folks who do symmetrical. The majority seem to be asymmetrical. However, I think what I've heard so far is not necessarily that the networks are at capacity, but that some of the services that folks are relying on, the teleconference services, the virtual private networks, services of that sort are overloaded and not the actual networks themselves. So those are a couple things that we're seeing, but personally, we've experienced that as well in our organization. We are a distributed workforce already, so we haven't experienced a ton of disruption with sort of forced virtualization, but some of the tools that we have relied upon have had some capacity issues apart from the broadband connection itself.
Well, Claude, thank you for that. And while maybe the logical side or the virtual side has not experienced disruptions, clearly there has been significant disruptions that coronavirus has imposed on WISPA. You mentioned it at the top briefly, but would you mind saying a little bit about the WISPA WISP America conference that was going to be taking place right now, and what you're doing in place of it? Because I'm sure all of our listeners would be interested to know what you're doing instead that they could participate in, perhaps.
Sure. So, like I said at the top, the reason why I'm able to participate this is because I am not in Dallas running around at our WISP America trade show, which was scheduled to have over 1,000 people there. Coronavirus is taking a pretty heavy toll on the events industry, and we're not excluded from that impact. So we're in the process now of trying to convert what was going to be our physical show into a virtual show. So we'll a lot of the content and other interesting things that were going to be happening in person in Dallas are now going to be moving online, assuming, like I said, all of the infrastructure and software works as planned. So don't have any additional details to share at this moment, but take a look at our website and stay tuned.
Okay, great. Well, and again, it's like we discussed in our Friday call on education, there's both the physical side of the networks and the applications and the interfaces, and just everyone getting comfortable with that. And fortunately, streaming has been around for a while. Most people know what to do. There's different approaches to it. We're obviously, streaming together, and this is available on YouTube and Facebook and LinkedIn. But let's turn now to some of the actual physical disruptions and what your members are doing to be careful, but also address issues and be as specific as you feel comfortable. Let's start with you, Mike, telling us a little bit about what NTCA members are doing in as they sort of help address issues that might arise, and then we'll turn to Angie and Claude.
Thanks, Drew. So let me talk about the issues that are arising and sort of work from those backwards to then what they're doing. So the first thing, one of the things we've been talking a lot about with federal agencies, and I know they're talking about with state agencies as well, is what do you do about, for example, getting access to an area that is subject to curfews or controlled zones or whatever you want to call them? How do you also get priority access to fuel if it's needed in one of those areas? So those are a couple of things that I know we've been working on, our members have been working on at the state level very closely as well. So that's one thing. Another thing, and Angie touched upon this earlier, is our members, even though many of them may telework if they're office workers, they're service techs. They have to be out in the field. They have to be doing installs. They have to be doing repairs. That's a difficult job during this time. And we are talking now with federal agencies. Again, our members are trying to engage with state agencies and governor's offices as well about a couple things here. Angie mentioned earlier the sort of potential if one employee is exposed, what happens to the entirety of the operation. It's a real issue we're trying to talk through now with folks thinking about OSHA requirements, other things. getting access to PPE. We've been really.
Let's define our terms. PPE.
Oh, sorry, sure, yeah, personal protective equipment. I'm sorry, I'm already falling into new telecom lingo, I guess, or other lingo, unfortunately. But yeah, getting access to that. Obviously, first responders, governmental officials, healthcare workers need access to that first and foremost. But once you get beyond that, I think essential critical infrastructure providers quickly should rise to the top of the list of folks who need access to that and try to get access to that. We're working through that now at the federal and state levels, but that's going to be critical because you have to follow certain requirements under OSHA with respect to how you manage employee safety and potentially avoid exposure to others. I mean, if you go into one house and then go to another for another trouble call, what does that mean? So getting access to sufficient amounts of that is critical, and it's something I think we're all still working through. The other thing is tests. I mean, if an employee is exposed to this, a technician, and they go from one house to the next, again, you've got to be thinking about where that is. Are you aware that somebody in the house has been exposed? With respect to the tests, if an employee has potential exposure, having a test on hand will allow you more quickly to tell whether that employee can go back to work and whether they might have affected the rest of the enterprise, especially when the average size of a enterprise like one of ours is 25 employees. So access to PPE, personal protective equipment, and access to tests are two things I think we're still working through, but it's going to be extremely important in order to keep these critical infrastructure networks up and running and to install new service where it's needed. So those are some of the issues I think folks are working through right now. They're putting policies, they've had policies in place, they're dusting off sort of business continuity policies and the like to make sure their employees are fresh and up to date on them and that they've got access to what they need. But these are the kinds of challenges they're working through in the field right now.
Let me also just ask you personally, Mike, how has your life been impacted over the last 4 days, 5 days, 7 days? You look like you're at home. How is NTCA as an organization managing, and what lessons might you share with others who are watching about working virtually?
Yeah, so we're in a very similar boat to what Angie and Claude have described with respect to their operations. We are in our Arlington office working remotely now. We went to telework as of Friday as well. And thus far, it hasn't been disruptive in that sense. I think we're all, because we're in an office environment, because we've got good connectivity. We've got two offices. We also have an operation down in Nashville that does a number of benefits for our members. So we've had this sort of ability to work remotely or interconnect anyway. So that's been a good thing. A lot of time trying to keep in touch with members as much as we can without getting in their way. So it hasn't been a big disruption that way. I would echo Claude's concern that with respect to events, we had to cancel an executive forum. I was supposed to be on a plane back from California today for a gathering of our CEOs. That's having an impact. The ability to network and connect directly, personally, certainly is having an effect, and it has an effect on the association.
Are you still finding are you doing a virtual event for them, or are some events kind of getting canceled and others still going forward in a virtual capacity?
So the CEO event is such a networking specific event and the leadership event that it's a little harder to think about how we reschedule that one necessarily. But we're looking at upcoming events and thinking through if we have to go virtual, and assuming that we're forced to as a result of governmental edicts and possibility, travel bans, what have you. What do we do to take those virtual? And yes, very much so. We're actively exploring that and moving more to webinar formats ourselves for presentations to members.
Great, and again, another event of this sort, we'll certainly explore some of those tools that people are using. We also want to talk about the digital divide at a future event, right? But just kind of mention that in case you have thoughts on that. I want to turn now to Angie. Just again, how are you as your members dealing with some of the kind of just physical nuts and bolts of addressing, outages or other things of that sort, as well as you personally and how this has affected you?
Sure. So the member companies actually have plans in place of how to deal with crises, including pandemics. So those plans are now fully operational. Of course, this is an evolving situation, right? There's many things that we didn't know a week ago that we now know. So they're having to stay on top of what the new guidelines are, how there may be impact on where they can travel, as like Mike mentioned. But they think it's really important that they, as a company, follow their plans, but also continue to follow what it is that the CDC and other governmental officials are recommending. There are some of these challenges that Mike's already mentioned, and I don't want to spend too much time just echoing things that he's already said. One of the concerns that I've most recently heard from my members is, what do we do if there's really a lockdown on all travel and it's only essential travel, even on the roads? So what kind of documentation are we going to need to present to show that we're like essential because it's our technicians that are keeping the networks up and running? So that's an issue that I think the state officials, as well as the FCC, is going to need to look at and provide some additional guidance in that particular issue, as we may see more state governments decide, or even local governments decide, that there should be areas that are locked down.
Right.
And in terms of, as an association, so 2 weeks ago today, we had our policy summit in Washington, and I will tell you, I've been biting my nails about, I hope no one was exposed earlier and traveled to DC and participated in our policy summit. I feel like right now we're about the 14th day. So I'm like, okay, I haven't heard that anybody was exposed, that I've gotten no information that anyone has been ill. I will say we did meet with the FCC the day after the policy summit, and that was the day that the FCC had changed its security procedures and asked each and every one of us if we had been out of the country before we were admitted into the building. And so, as I mentioned, it's really evolving, and how things are changing. It kind of is changing from day to day. So it has been challenging, but we were lucky that our policy summit has already taken place. We didn't have the significant disruption like what Claude and his membership is dealing with their a big event, and then also that Mike is now dealing with. But we have an event that's coming up in September, and it's in Vegas, and it's our big trade show. It's a significant part of our revenue stream, as well as a significant networking opportunity and business opportunity. Many transactions of our members happen at that show. But we're following closely what's going on, and we'll be making decisions as needed to modify that show. Right now, we've made no decisions about modifying it, but we're going to have to keep a watch of that and make decisions as the months tick, and we may see additional changes happen.
Yes, absolutely. Certainly the point about conferences and travels is well taken. And your earlier point, and let me just emphasize it, it's like this crisis is definitely broadening our view of what a first responder is, right? I mean, certainly the medical professionals are first responders and heroes who are out there literally risking their lives, as we have seen in Italy and elsewhere in Europe, and we will likely see in America. And secondly, we need to make sure that broadband is understood to be a first responder too, because that's what is going to help us through this. That's kind of the point of this webcast series, is to make sure people realize that there are these tools that we can do some things, right? I mean, I again try to put some context on the pandemic we're in. 102 years ago, during the Spanish influenza, so-called Spanish influenza, really a global pandemic, they certainly didn't have the ability to communicate like this and to let people know and to get people on the same page as quickly as most people are in terms of the social distancing, stay away from a public forum with more than 50 and now more than 10 people. So Claude, we still have a few minutes left for you to talk at whatever length you need on some of the challenges you all face. And I know that I know from interacting with lots of WISPA members that there's a real rugged individualism among WISPs in the country, and we see that you guys are out there climbing towers, making sure that some of the least populous areas of the country are served. How are you hearing your members, even if preliminarily, coping with this, and what precautions are your companies taking as they try to keep making sure there's coverage, broadband coverage in the country?
Sure, it honestly is a struggle for them, because as you noted, on one hand, they're community based. They're typically very rugged individualists, and they're focused on trying to get connectivity out there at all costs. And now you have this pandemic that is causing them to think about things like Mike was mentioning. How do I protect my employees? Do I continue to install service even if folks want it in order to protect my workforce? So, this pandemic is, I think, causing a significant struggle within the communications industry because, on the one hand, I think all of us on this call would recognize that what our respective members are doing is providing that essential service that is allowing folks to stay connected in a time where people are feeling increasingly unconnected. But then how do you do that while still protecting your own workforce as best as possible? So, that's kind of the tension that I think a lot of folks are dealing with on the ground right now. And from what I hear from folks, they're out there. They're still continuing to install. They're still continuing to expand their networks, but just trying to do so in as safe a way as possible.
Yeah, no, I mean, I appreciate you kind of clarifying that, and I lost connectivity for a moment there, and I don't know whether others and our viewers did as well. Anything you just want to underscore from a perspective of how, have you thought of or issued any kind of best practices aside from, following the Center for Disease Control, or are there or any of you? Let's just start with Claude, but have any of you kind of said, hey, here's some guidance we want to give you?
Yeah, for now, I think we've just been funneling information from our government partners to our members. Given the timing for us as an organization, we've been unwinding a major trade show at the same time as we're trying to support our members as they're transitioning to business operations in the time of a pandemic. So a lot of the work has just been being in communication with government partners and trying to get that information in a relatively undigested form to our members as quickly as possible.
Okay. Well, we have 2 minutes left. Angie and Mike, and also Claude, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners about what this Keep America Connected pledge means to you, or other initial thoughts as your members are confronting how broadband can assist in the coronavirus pandemic?
Oh, I'll go, I guess. So I think the Keep Americans Connected pledge. I think the reason so many of our members signed up was because it's already sort of inherent in their DNA, and I think Angie and Claude's membership, again, whether it was by design or just by happenstance, I think you got several organizations that are all relatively close to the customers they serve. And so as a result, it's something their members found consistent with everything they try to do and want to do. Hopefully we'll see this evolve, and the people will continue to see what they can do, what other steps they can take, as I think Angie may have mentioned earlier. Viewing the pledge as a floor, and not everybody's gonna be able to do more. I mean, as both of the other speakers have said here, we're in a difficult time. Things are changing fast. Not every company has the ability to do everything that they would like to do in this space. So we recognize that not everybody could, for example, even sign on to the pledge, and they may not be able to take additional steps. But I think the chairman and the whole commission and others in government have sort of rightly called upon people to do whatever it is they can do to help make sure that people who are now forced to work from home or learn from home have the best chances possible to do that. So I just hope that conversation continues to evolve and develop and strengthen as, unfortunately, this situation evolves and develops.
Angie, any quick final thoughts that you have?
I really think Mike is such a great recap of where we've been on this conversation. It really is a time of need, listening, really think of what we can do to support each other in our communities. both with respect to the distinctive, geographic communities that we live and work in, as well as the industry. I think of this as a time of grace, right? Where we all need to be gracious to one another, to be helpful to one another. And so, we're really proud of our member companies, what they've committed to do, those that are able to do more. We want to be a resource, to the entire industry, to the policymakers who are looking at these issues. So, I'd really just urge those who may be listening, to the extent that you need additional information from Encompass, WISPA, or NTCA and its members, don't hesitate to reach out to the panelists, because we all want to be sure that we're making the information available as much as we possibly can in these really challenging times. So, and thank you, Drew, for bringing attention to this matter.
Great. Well, we're out of time unless there's any additional thoughts. I just want to thank our audience for watching us. Thank you for being online. We will be back tomorrow at 12 noon Eastern time. We hope to talk about emergency measures that the FCC has done. Thank you again for Broadband Breakfast, and have a great day.